Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you, Ruth, for the introduction, and welcome to the CANSO Academy webinar, Accelerating Swim Readiness, a practical introduction to swim. As Ruth mentioned, my name is Nikki Harry-Charon. I am currently the Operations Program Manager here at CANSO and your moderator today. We're delighted to have a diverse audience of 729 registered attendees, including air navigation service providers, regulators, industry partners, and other stakeholders. We're united by a common goal: advancing information exchange and digital transformation in aviation. Today, we'll educate you in system-wide information management, or better known as SWIM, why it matters, what it is, and how it's being implemented globally. You'll learn about the drivers for SWIM, the purpose and design of the CANSO SWIM Toolkit, and practical ways to use it as a reference and guide to help accelerate implementation. CANSO, the Civil Air Navigation Services Organization, as the video mentioned, is the global voice of air traffic management. Our members provide air navigation services to over 90% of the world's air traffic. We work closely with ICAO and a broad network of stakeholders to share information, help shape policy, and champion best practices that enhance safety and efficiency across the aviation ecosystem. Our agenda for today will take us through 5 main parts. We'll begin with the context, why SWIM is important, and what led to the development of the toolkit. Next, we'll look at the purpose and audience, who the toolkit is designed for, and how it can be used. We'll then move into a walkthrough of the toolkit itself, its key components, tools, and implementation guidance. After that, we'll hear from an ANSP perspective, the FAA, with practical lessons learned from their own implementation journey. And finally, we'll wrap up with a Q&A question and answer session, giving you the chance to engage directly with our speakers. We're very fortunate to have 2 excellent presenters with us today. Wayne Ossie, Chief Architecture for Global Aviation and Transportation at Solis, and the co-chair of CANSO's Digital Transformation Work Group. Wayne will kick us off today by introducing and walking us through the SWIM toolkit. Lucas Kearns is the SWIM project lead at the FAA and a participant in the CANSO Digital Transformation Work Group. Lucas will then share the FAA SWIM journey and the lessons they've learned along the way. We have approximately 2 hours together today, 90 minutes of which will be presentations by both Wayne and Lucas, followed by a 30 minutes of question and answer. As Ruth mentioned, please submit questions anytime during the presentations in the chat. We'll collect them and address them, and we'll address as many as possible during the question and answer session. Please note the session is being recorded and the recording will be shared with all registered attendees. Once again, welcome and thank you for investing your time today with us. Let's begin. Wayne, over to you.
Thank you, Nikki, and thanks everybody for attending. I know this is, not always an optimal time for everybody, but we do, it should be relatively good for most people. I'm going to start out with some basics. I know a lot of people probably have seen some of this before, but just sort of to give a baseline on SWIM, and kind of in the context of what we've learned over really a couple decades, I think now. So next slide, please. So this is probably a picture that many of you have seen. Or a form of this has probably been around for almost 30 years now. But in the last year or 2, things have really accelerated. ANSPs like the FAA and others have developed long ago some of their SWIM capability. But this is what you may often see as the first inspiration for SWIM. It was sort of the first picture, I believe it came from Eurocontrol originally maybe, but There's a long history there too. But you can see that there's layers here, and this is sort of the interoperability layers that we're always talked about. You'll notice on the top we have the applications, so the different types of silos that we have today, so to speak, the different application areas, and then just below that you'll notice there's information services. Now this is absolutely key to SWIM. This is how everything works. Everything is broken into services, so not monolithic large system applications, but pieces that you can manage and develop independently. And then just below that is information exchange models. So the Axonfix and MyWixoms of the world, there's people here. There are other formats as well. Not all information that's shared over SWIM is in these formats, but these are all AIRM based, and that is kind of the sort of the data dictionary that is used to represent the data elements so that everybody has a common language they talk. And this helps significantly with the interoperability. It also allows you to have much more flexible forms of these formats so that you can actually add in features and fields much more easily than in the older formats. And then the technical infrastructure, or sometimes called SWIM TI. This is sort of the foundation for all of SWIM. This is where sort of everything gets exchanged, the equivalents of what the AFTA and AMHS kinds of technologies are doing today, and probably will do for some time. But as you'll see in the drivers coming up, there's some changes happening there. And then the network connectivity on the bottom, which is really something that's required for SWIM, is an IP network. So TCP/IP and the like. An IP network is a fundamental requirement for SWIM. Next slide, please. So what SWIM is an enabler, really, and I think that's the best way to think of it. We talk about benefits, we talk about what you can do with SWIM, but it's a foundational element. It allows you to develop the more digital transformed applications and information services. So it's not something that does something for you by itself. It's really providing that modern foundation so that you can do those modern applications and information services and gain the security and the flexibility, performance, and isolation, so resiliency. All of these things get improved, and now you can start to talk to other systems that are in the more modern technologies, start to leverage things like the cloud and so on, right? So you have this ability, this capability is what SWIM provides. Next slide, please. So this is another way of looking at it more like a sandwich. There's some applications, some information services, and then the SWIM TI is sort of the foundation of SWIM. This provides all of the exchange, the information exchange mechanisms, and the security, governance, and so on as well at the runtime level, and then the IP network you see around that. Next slide, please. This is another picture that everybody's probably seen. This is where we're taking sort of this big cobweb of connections that you see between entities, and a lot of these are what we call in the past we call them point to point, and this interpreted different ways. In sort of the standard way of thinking about point to point is it's a lease line between two entities. So there's a physical connection, a physical network made just between two entities, and every system you integrate you would have separate lease lines to, for instance, right? So this is a very rigid and strict and inflexible kind of mechanism, and it provides lots of opportunities to integrate many different places, right? Many different things. And so there's not really one standard for how you would communicate with a different system. Everybody would have their own ICD, and it would be just a huge amount of effort to maintain it and keep going. The migration is to SWIM, which is more of a network-centric model. So the idea is that you have a common network, in this case an IP network. So you're not using leased lines necessarily, and not that they're precluded, but you generally will have a network that you work with. It could be a private network that's, let's say something like in Europe, there's NewPens, in Asia, there's CRV. So there's a common private network, and then there's public networks and other networks that are blended in for things like MET and so on services. But again, you can see there's this concept of information service consumers, and on the bottom, information service providers. And I'm using terms that are in the ICAO documents, so I try and keep as close to that as I can. So because that's part of the foundation of what's the body of knowledge is really written in a lot of the ICAO documents is sort of a starting point, but it's a lot to read. And part of what this is doing in this kit is to try and blend some of that into a little bit more condensed format, but trying to keep true to those names and those terms. And then you'll see their standard interfaces and SOA, which you may not be able to read under the swim word there that well, but SOA is service-oriented architecture. This is the modernization side of things, part of it. This is where you're using information services, so that's sort of where that comes from. But it also includes some other architectural principles. So, and those principles are actually extremely important. They're kind of the sort of the list of commandments for this, right? So I think it's important that, and we will talk about that briefly as well on a slide. Next slide, please. That happens to be the next slide. So the swim principles, and this is sort of a very high level. There's a lot of detail around these in documents, but this is really just a summary for this purpose. Interoperable information services. So not just the fact that you have information services, which is what the service-oriented architecture kind of provides, but also interoperable, right? And part of the way you do that is by having the AXIM, by Wixom, or the AIRM-based data elements in the payloads that you're shipping around, you're exchanging. But there's also more than just that, right? There's a lot of things you have to do to try and make sure things are interoperable, meaning you don't have to do a lot of extra work or special work for every single type of service, right? And then so some of the regions and some of the countries, the NSPs will have what they call swim profiles, something like that, swim TI profiles, some technical infrastructure profiles. These are a way to describe in more technical terms the protocols being used, so for messaging and other protocols that are used in other parts of swim, but to give a standard way for all of the information service consumers and information service providers to be able to communicate and in a standardized way. So you don't have to have a different way for every single service, right? So at least in certain regions, like in APAC, there's sort of regional swim, so there's regional requirements, regional profiles, and then same thing in Europe. And then in countries, you know, they have similar types of things for sort of standardizing how they work with it. The separation of information provision and consumption is a very important part. This is how it's also part of loose coupling. So we're basically saying that the consumer and the provider information are separated. So the information consumer is isolated from the service implementation details. So it knows how to talk to it using one of these standard profiles, let's say a certain protocol and a certain endpoint that it uses. And it's keeping all the details of what's done underneath kind of isolated from them. So it's trying to use standard and usually open wireline form protocols so that you can switch between products easily, so you're not locked into products, right? This is part of you having the ability to have this swim layer, which is transverse, it's across multiple systems, so that you can share information across silos, across different sources of information. In the past, what you do is what you would consider swim would be part of each silo. So each solution you'd buy would have its own version of what we would call swim, but then you have multiple swims, and every swim may have different protocols. So in this case, what we're trying to do is standardize on what that is and have more of a transverse foundation that all of those systems use to share information. The loose coupling is extremely important. This is where you don't necessarily have the knowledge between the consumer and the provider of information. And then discoverability. So people have probably heard of swim registries. Swim registries are a way to provide information on information services to the consumers so that they can look at these directories, so to speak, and find the different services that make sense for them. And then they can choose them, and then they can contact the information service provider, get whatever agreements, similar to what you do with data agreements today. And then you get some kind of access to their system, right? That's if you actually get to that point, and then you start using swim. Open standards, again, very important. The swim profiles that are out there today are using open standard wireline protocols like AMQP 1.0 and HTTP. There are others that are potentially usable too, but this gives us at least a smaller set of ICDs to work with, right, so to speak. So you're going from having multiple ICDs to one or a very small number, and it makes a huge difference when you want to onboard new services, new providers, or new consumers. And that's part of why you have that loose coupling up there. When you want to add a consumer, it doesn't necessarily, the providers don't necessarily need to know it's even happening, or if they remove a consumer, right? So the idea is you get a much more flexibility in this. And then secure information exchange. So there's a lot of work that's going on in ICAO around this trust framework instances and so on. There's a bunch of documents. I have one slide to talk briefly about that. But that's starting to really ramp up a lot now. So there's a lot of information there that people need to start being aware of. Next slide, please. So if we go back to the ICAO documentation around SWIM, so a lot of these documents came out last year. They've been around for a while, but they were actually sort of formally published, and we have the document numbers there now. So the SWIM concept, that was the first thing that came out, describing the actual, what SWIM is at a high level. And you'll see some of the diagrams, you'll see the same types of diagrams, in the kit and in this presentation. And that's Doc 10039. And then the PANS-IM, which is the procedures for air navigation services, information management. This is applicable in November last year. So this has the provisions for what SWIM is. They're very high level, but there are some that are have specific shells in there that you need to pay attention to. And we do, in the SWIM kit, we try and boil that down so that you can kind of get an idea. But you do need to make sure you reference these documents, and they are a good place to start. And then the SWIM guidance, which is 10203. So that one is going to give you, it's quite a lengthy manual. It's giving you a lot of information about service area architecture, a lot of the terms, and getting down into more of the implementation level of things, okay? And so this is sort of what you would have normally by itself, is these 3 documents. Next slide, please. And what the SWIM kit tries to do is take those and sort of bring all that information in, and then take some of the experience and lessons learned, the best practices from SWIM over the last couple of decades, and input from what's going on in ICAO and CANSO in the work groups and panels, and bring it together. And the little cloud there is supposed to be rubber meets the road. The idea is that it's supposed to bring this together and condense it as best as possible to provide you something that's a little more digestible to look at as a reference, as motivation, and as a way to help you accelerate your SWIM implementation. Next slide, please. So globally, there's a lot going on with SWIM, especially the last, I'd say, 2 years. As everybody probably knows, there's a lot of people interested in this presentation as well, as you can tell. So I think it's really starting to be pushed forward. And part of it is because there actually are some drivers, which we'll get to very shortly. ANSPs are still implementing state SWIM. I say here some are done. I don't know if we're ever really done with SWIM, to tell you the truth. I think it's always changing. I think one of the things that happens is people implement this and then they realize there's all these new things they can do that they never had the chance to do, because the sharing of the information becomes so much easier. And so then they can start working on more advanced types of information sharing, and also like things like AI, machine learning, analytics, all sorts of other things, but also sensors, all sorts of different types of information that maybe we didn't have in the past. And now it becomes much easier to share this. And so now it's available. People didn't even think they could get it before. And then now they start using it for purposes that maybe are just flight planning like today, but now they're getting more information than they could have gotten before. And it just allows it to be more rich and safer, right? So the FAA, Eurocontrol, NAV Canada, there's a long list of ANSPs that have come, and regional SWIMs that have made a lot of progress. APAC has been making a lot of progress the last couple of years as well. Some big issues that usually come up are getting started. A lot of times there's no SWIM staff, so you have someone from the IIS world or some MET or something, and they're trying to sort of wear multiple hats to do SWIM. So getting started is a little difficult. Also, all those documents are a little overwhelming sometimes. The SWIM kit is supposed to help with some of that, to try and condense it, but you still need those references, obviously. And then the knowledge and experience around messaging. Today we have Afton, AMHS. SWIM is sort of the next thing, but it's using more modern messaging technologies, and the knowledge around what messaging can and can't do is not something that's very well spread around in the organization. So it's something that is a sort of a constant thing. It's part of digital transformation. It's part of coming to terms with all of the modern technologies that you can use. And I say modern, but AMQP 1.0, for instance, which is in some of these SWIM profiles, right, which is one of the most common protocols besides HTTP. This is something that was developed in 2006 by JP Morgan in the finance world. And so, we're actually using something from finance just by using that. It developed over a number of years, but this is something that is part of the modernization. So even though it's new, it's been used for decades. So it's not new in terms of, really, but it is something that we need to learn about, make sure we understand. Global swim routing is something kind of close to what I'm doing these days. Basically, it's just about how information is shared between, let's say, swims is one of the areas that's an interesting area, especially for regional multinodal swims. And then the need for swim experts. You hear this a lot. And so, part of what we're trying to do is have some scale with getting the education out, and that's what the swim kit is partly about. Next slide, please. So swim benefits. There's a lot of discussion of the swim benefits in the swim concept document. So I'm not going to repeat all of these things, but just to give you sort of first things that come to my mind is improving safety, security, resiliency, performance, agility, and even lowering cost. So we don't always hear things like that, but that is the case in some ANSPs who've implemented swim. There's certain costs that they're saving, and they're significant in some cases. So it's not all about just becoming modern. It's about sharing information easily, but also when you start doing that and you start having one way for applications and information services and the consumers to communicate with each other, then your scale is very easily grown, and you get a lot of agility. And that loosely coupling provides a lot of agility too. So you add providers or you add information services, you add consumers. All of these don't need to know that that's happening necessarily, right? Not at the runtime level. There may be agreements and so on, of course, that you need to have, but once you go into the runtime environment, these things can be very dynamic. Okay. We always hear about this, getting the right information to the right place at the right time. This is sort of, if someone had to say what swim is, that's kind of what we're trying, we talk about. But there's very many layers to that sentence, and it really is a requirement or a set of requirements. And what we're trying to do is increase the situational awareness and collaboration and all the things that you get out of being able to share easily and more safely are providing those benefits. But getting the right information to the right place at the right time is interpreted today. If you took this 20 years ago and you said that, you would be thinking probably a little bit differently. But today, getting the right information to the right place, it doesn't necessarily mean to the primary receiver of that. It also means secondary systems, which in the past were not as big a concern. But if you're going to have information coming in, that information may have to go to a specific party, but then you may also have analytic systems, systems that are analyzing risk. All of those systems are the right place as well. They need to get the information too, but they're not necessarily known by the provider. So this is where you start to get into what these words mean today as we modernize. The service-oriented architecture I mentioned, creating modular components, you have services, you can manage, procure separately these like information services. So let's say there's services that an ANSP decides it needs. They may develop them themselves. It may purchase them, run them on premise. It may outsource them to some other country or another entity, or it may offer them to their services to another ANSP, right? So these are all things that can become possible. Okay, But in the end, the service area architecture benefits in the state level are really the information services as the sort of the mechanism that we use to share. Again, loose coupling, I can't say it enough times. This is one of the things that this does is it allows you to make changes to a system and not affect the participants. So that's another thing. And so as an example, this is one ANSP who saves a lot of money every time they onboard a new information service consumer, because now there's just one way to connect. There's not many ways. And it's not like, oh, I want to connect to you. I have this special kind of system. I need to make it work with yours. It's like, no, this is the way you do it. It's in a Swim TI profile, for instance. We have the information services in a registry. You have all the information about what the service is and how to use it. You get the agreement to use it, and then you can start using it. So it's a much simpler type of scenario for integration. And then some airspace users, so they may decide to join an ANSP Swim implementation. So in some states, let's say, there's all sorts of airspace user sizes, right? So some of the smaller ones may decide that they don't want to implement their own entire Swim, but they just want to join an ANSP Swim implementation, sort of as a user of it. And so there's some of the things that we're starting to see as we go forward. But like I said, Doc 10039 has really got a large list of them. And that's part of what the Swim kit tries to do, is not restate everything that's already stated. It's trying to condense it and reference back to the documents so that you don't like just copy everything out of those documents and have them all written in a different document. Right? Next slide, please. So this is sort of a diagram I'm using a lot lately. Just again, it's very simple, but if you look at the Swim TI there and you have enterprise messaging service, we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. That's a service, so it's not a product. Okay, so it's provided by potentially multiple systems. The information service provider, information service consumer on the top, you see those. And then there's applications and information services correspondingly. And then you can have multiple of each of those. On the right, separately, you'll see a Swim registry, which has service overviews, information service overviews. So this is the directory, the yellow pages for the services, right? And this can be extremely simple, right? The Swim registry, you can look at the provisions. So when you get a chance, there's a talk about the registry, and you got to be careful when you read it. You really have a very minimal requirement there. It's a very, very important requirement, but it's a pretty minimal requirement. It's not necessarily a full-blown system, right? It's really more of a yellow pages thing. So keep in mind, that's why it's separate from this, okay? It's an important item. In the legends, you'll see the colors kind of are used to describe sort of governance or runtime or design time, and then security. So you'll see those in subsequent diagrams. Next slide, please. So Swim governance, this is something that's becoming, as we start to get more implementations in Swim, the governance side of it is extremely important, obviously. A lot of the governance is very similar to some of the activities that happen today, because you're exchanging information today, and this is exchanging information too. There are some differences, but generally it's a lot of the same things. So if you think about what you've done with AMHS, for instance, it's a very similar type of thing. So you have the rules, policies, processes, and standards. Now you have something called information services. So that's a different idea. But the rest of it is pretty similar. I mean, today you have Flight Plan 2012. You'll have FIXM 4.3 probably as you go to FFICE. So just different format, but policies and so on about changing things, similar. It'll be easier to change a FIXM format, but that's a different kind of thing. But these processes and policies are all important and needed. Defining and establishing the governance structures. One thing to keep in mind is you're providing a lot more ability to share. So you are going to have more participants probably. And you're also going to have more throughput, let's say. So just keep that in mind, because one of the things we've noticed with Swim is once you start sharing, the number of users and the amount of data kind of can grow pretty quickly. So you have to be ready for that. And I think it's important that there's policies and processes and so on in place to make sure that you can handle that when it happens. Because the more digital you become, the faster things can change on you. So they're much more dynamic in a good way, and also, you know, in a bad way in terms of volume, right? You can all of a sudden get kind of overwhelmed. So it's important to have these things in place so you can be a buffer for when those types of things happen. So the processes for development, you know, approval, evolution of standards. Luckily, a lot of the Axum, Fixum, Wixum formats and so on have been settling down a lot. They don't change as much anymore, so that's good. But you still need something in place to handle when they do change, as an example. Promoting information interoperability among stakeholders. I don't use the word collaboration very much, but collaboration is a huge thing here. One of the best things you can do is engage stakeholders as soon as possible. That's one of the things we've learned. And that's kind of true for any kind of work you do that crosses stakeholders. But here it's even more important as you go forward with SWIM. And defining this transition to SWIM environment. So there's different levels of this. There's a transition from EFT AMHS to SWIM. Some people may be aware there's a draft out there for the AMHS SWIM Gateway concept product line. And then there's some ANSPs have developed services themselves to do some transition. There's a lot of different approaches to it in terms of, you know, the existing technologies. So there's all that. And then these regional agreements. So now let's say you have a SWIM profile for a region, you get agreement around the region for it, which is maybe something new. So yeah, so there's some things to consider there. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to get into some of the drivers that really the last year or two, because some of these didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago. And it's, you know, it used to be, no, you really should do SWIM, it's important. It's in the GAMP, you know, but yeah, now there's like, there's basically real requirements here now. So we'll go next slide, please. So I'm going to talk briefly about 3. So there's the Flight Plan 2012 cessation. This is one of the biggest drivers right now, but also in EU, and I'm sure everybody in the EU already is very familiar with CP1. This is a lot of different things, a lot of requirements around SWIM, including some of the stuff that supports the first item there. And then APAC Regional SWIM is an example of a region and what's going on there, that they have their own dates and timelines that are driving things, again, influenced by the above as well. Next slide, please. So cessation, 2034. This is for pre-flight planning, sorry. This is FFICE Release 1. There's mandatory services. There's a set of services, but there's a set that's mandatory. In Europe, for instance, they're doing all the services. So for pre-departure flight planning, these services run over SWIM. So they use Fixum and they run over SWIM. So if you want to make 2034, you have to have FFICE Release 1 services, at least the required ones. And you also have to be using, obviously, Fixum as part of that. And this has to run on SWIM. So if you just take with today, 2025, and then 2034 is the end of that for pre-departure flight planning. So that means you have to have SWIM, which means you also have to have an IP network. So you have to have all those things to do that. So that's a pretty big set of projects to get going. So the sooner you get involved in getting SWIM implemented, the better. And this is why you know, ICAO itself is very concerned about making sure that states and regions get their SWIM implementations accelerated, because you really have to have that in place before you can do the FFI services. So it's a very important thing. And so this is really a very strong driver. And the airspace users are obviously a very key part of this, right? They're submitting these flight plans. They're expected to file directly with ANSPs. In the past, the departure airport may forward it. Still could be the case in some places, but generally it looks like what's happening is the airspace users are filing directly with the ANSPs. So a little bit of a change already with that. Some airspace users, especially smaller ones, may use an ANSP swim implementation. So if that's the case, they may be passing it through a state's swim implementation, or a CFSP may be used. So there's a bunch of options there, but this is really a very big driver, and swim is really a foundation of this. So you really have to get that in place so that you can have those FFI services in place, so you can remove Flight Plan 2012 from this specific set of services. Next slide, please. So in EU, there's the CP1. This is a large set of things that have to be done, and they've done a fantastic job getting all of this going, including FFI Release 1 services. So they have all these things in place now. And this is in a regional level, but also for the states. So it's a lot of coordination and a lot of work. And I think it's good, a really great example of what you can do when there's a lot of collaboration, because there is a lot of collaboration there. And again, the same airspace users comment, but it's the EU swim is really being driven so much by CP1 because it's more of a legal thing now. So in the old days, it was like, please implement swim. And then it was, well, facilitate your swim. And now it's, well, you have to do it. It's in the laws. So now it's something that there's really not a lot of choice about. So again, this is a very strong driver. But this driver isn't just for Europe, because if you're flying to, over, or from Europe, you have to submit your flight plans using FFICE. And so this is already December. This is this year, right? So, everybody has to deal with this. It's not just Europe, right? So it's even though a region may have certain requirements for SWAM or some information services, it has an impact almost always, outside the region. So this is why it's very important to pay attention to what's happening in other parts of the world as well. And APAC is another example where they're moving quite fast. Next slide, please. I'll just go over this quickly. So just an example that, APAC has its own set of dates that they're moving towards. So you see 2034, but the dates for the region are actually before that, right? So it's coming even faster, right? So let's say 2030, I mean, that's only 5 years. So it this is just to show you that there's dates that are moving quickly. And if APAC is done with all these things, then if you're going to fly to, over, from APAC, you're going to have the same kind of issue. So the sooner you get started, the better. So these are all examples of, this is not just nice to have. This is something that really has to happen now. Next slide, please. This is just an example also in APAC. They have a regional swim TI profile. Again, it's using, it's sort of piggybacking on the Eurocontrol yellow profile as an example. So, which is actually really nice because now you have, commonality there, and the FAA is using a lot of the same things. So NAV Canada as well. So you're getting a lot of commonality so that, you can have some consistency, and it's easier for everybody. Once they start working with one ANSP, it should be the same or very similar. So that's actually a really good sign. The architecture in the regional area is more of a hierarchical thing. It's still not completely set in stone, but there's different ways of doing things. So Europe is more centralized, APAC is going to be more distributed. And then there's states by themselves out there. I think having more regions is actually probably a good thing, because it sort of gives you a single place to go to instead of connecting to everybody. And then there's FFICE and TBO efforts in APAC and around the world, obviously. In Europe especially, there's the same things. And Lucas will talk, he's one of our FFICE experts. So, we get into that whole area now. So our work group had given a briefing to the ATFM ACDM work group not long ago about SWIM, because FFICE and ATFM and ACDM, it's all getting together, and everybody's going to have to start moving towards this. Next slide, please. So this is, again, this is more for reference. I'm not going to go into details here, but the cybersecurity side of things has been moving forward quite fast. There's a couple documents that are already out, and there's another one that's going to be coming out soon. It's very important. You know, this is all about using modern security. There's the public key, infrastructure that you need to handle certificates and so on. And then there's this concept of trust framework instances, which is broader than just SWIM. This is just in general for information security across aviation, so in ATM. So this is just, again, for reference. So people should take a look at this, look at these documents, and start to familiarize yourself with them if you haven't already. Next slide, please. So this is a similar picture that you've seen before. On the bottom, there are other requirements besides what's in, let's say, the provisions there. You have the GAP mock, you have the GAMP, you have the PERGs, PANS ATM, annexes, and so on. And some of these annexes and other things are changing over time. There's different types of requirements that, for SWIM and for these other capabilities like FFICE and so on that are causing annexes to have adjustments, right? So it's important to keep track of all of that. And then there's regional and state requirements on top of, the requirements that are coming in from the standard ICAO kind of level. Next slide, please. So why was the swim kit developed? Well, it's partly, the biggest reason is because there's all these documents out there giving you information about swim, but it's a lot to look at, for one thing. The original intent of the swim kit was to be 10 to 15 pages. Of course, it's 40. It's not supposed to be so long. But the idea was to try and keep it compressed as much as possible. And so it's sort of as a reference, as a place to look at things around swim without having to go into the deeper documents. I mean, you still need to do that, but at least this is supposed to serve a purpose of being a little bit more condensed and sort of just the essence of what needs to be done. And you can always refer back to the ICAO documents to see the exact wording and so on for things. And that's part of the idea of the swim kit too, is to not regurgitate all the same information, right? It's trying to condense it and point back to the places where you can get the information, but also demystifying swim. This is one of the big things. It's been, swim's been around a long time. People think it went away, it came back. Now it's very strong because of all these requirements we just went over, these drivers. But it really is simpler than I think people think it is. I think it's a lot less costly than what you would be using today. It can be much less expensive to do the same types of things. It's finally trying to bring information across silos. So, that transverse side of it is very important. And the power of information and taking control of information. So one of the things that happens in some ANSPs and actually airports too, is they're starting to look at doing things in-house that they may have outsourced before, because now they realize how easy it is to share information, and it's so much easier for them to do it. And because they have access to all the information around their enterprise, now they have the ability to do things that before would have had custom integrations for all those things. So all of a sudden, things that used to seem so overwhelming as a project are looking a lot simpler now. And simplifying swim, and that's what this is about, is trying to condense what is needed to be done and some of the guidance. And I've always been a big proponent of hands-on, actually doing something. And I think it's why I provided some sandboxes to like in the APAC, for instance, to provide a way for people to just kick tires, kind of get used to like, well, what does this mean? What does pub sub mean? Things like that, and have some simple demos and sandboxes, which I'm a big proponent of as well. It's a place to collaborate, to try it out, to kick the tires, to try out swim, and it's actually quite easy. So I mean, you could literally, there's multiple products out there you can download and just try. Because they're basically generic messaging products in a lot of cases, or at least for part of what you would have for a swim TI. And then you can actually start interacting with it and try things out without even programming anything. I mean, just running something very simple. So running swim is a big part of this. And actually over time, we've taken out a bit of that out of the swim kit. I used to have a lot more of that, but we're trying to make sure we had a balance. So next slide, please. So who is it for? It's anybody who exchanges information, really. As I mentioned before, AMQP 1.0 is an example, which is a protocol for messaging. It's used, it's an open wireline. It was kind of started by JP Morgan, and it's been used over a long period of time. And it's something that allows you to exchange information. It favors maybe certain message exchange patterns, but it's very heavily used, not just in swim, but it's also used in other industries. So I think the ANSPs are one of the most important entities involved, but then there's a lot of stakeholders. And so stakeholders in this case, the airspace users, Met, there's airports, there's regulators, there's pilots, industry. There's a lot of stakeholders. The same stakeholders generally you have today, but also will expand over time, as I think the FAA has done over time. And then roles, it spans many different roles. So the idea is this is something that you can use without necessarily programming something. If you have developers, I think it's actually really good for them because they start to see how things might work. But I think everybody needs to get their skills up on what swim is and the products involved. And then especially digital transformation, because these are the same products that are used, not just in swim, these are the same exact products that are used in trading systems and finance. They're used in airports, they're used in airlines, they're used in automated ports, they're used in connected car, they're used in all these different areas, all these different industries. And they're the same products in most cases. The only thing that's different is really Axon, Fixum, iWixom, the processes, the safety culture, and the focus, things like that. But this stuff's, has been cooked for quite a while. Next slide, please. How it's intended to be used. So it's really trying to motivate people to accelerate swim. It's guidance, condensed. It's a reference also you can go back to because there's links. Hopefully the links kind of stay alive. People move things on the web. And then we're going to be having more of these webinars and also some workshops where we're going to get into more detail with this stuff. So as a swim sandbox, it's really part of the example, is having the sandbox is really an EMS or an enterprise messaging system or service that allows you to exchange information using like request reply and publish subscribe and so on, right? So originally we had a little bit more hands-on, like more not developer level, but pretty down at the road level. But we're intending that these workshops and so on are going to be, again, high level, right? So you don't have to be a developer to do it because everybody needs to know how to do it. The developer, okay, they're going to go in there, write some code to do something special, but most of the stuff that you need to do is pretty run of the mill, right? So, and that's part of what these workshops and webinars are going to be focused on, especially the workshops, is how you can practically try these things out and get the idea of how these things work without actually coding anything necessarily. Next slide, please. So I have about 10 minutes left, or maybe less. So I'm gonna go over some of this quickly. There's a lot of things in here that are in the kit itself, but this is sort of the meat of the kit. This is really a list. Go to the next slide, please. You'll see what's in here. So the key components, the tools, implementation guidance. Next slide, please. So the components, so really it's, I talk about a minimal swim implementation. So there's a tool, it's something that I developed. It's something, I mean, it's an example, right? I could develop a swim implementation, right? So it can't be that hard. But it's something to just give you something like a sandbox, essentially a swim sandbox. It's something you can play with, right? That's the idea. And this is something we'll get into with the workshops, right? The condensed guidance I mentioned, swim best practices, and Lucas will have some great, information coming from what they've done. Implementation checklist, a very simple one. Resources, like I said, pointing to other things instead of having everything in this. And then there's sort of at the end, there's sort of a hot topic, which is about sort of message metadata, which we're not going to get into today. It's more of an advanced kind of concept, and it's still developing. Next slide, please. So this is just showing you, again, same picture, right? But in this case, there's this tool which I developed, but it's really just, you have information service consumers, providers, you have information services, and then you have a SWIM EMS. And the SWIM EMS is, well, we'll talk about it in a second, but the SWIM TI is that bottom part. And so there's this thing called the SWIM tool, right? It's just something that was written in Java. I wrote it in Java. It's not rocket science. And it's just a way to try and test out some ideas around SWIM with command line kind of things, or a web page, that kind of stuff. Next page. So the SWIM tool is, like I said, what it is. SDK Perf is an example of a command line tool to create sample information service consumers or providers. So when I say IS in uppercase, it's information service, and then the C is consumer or provider, just so people don't get lost. SWIM sandboxes. So basically an instance of a SWIM TI, like the SWIM tool is an example, but also could just be one of the EMS products. A lot of the EMS products have a lot of what the SWIM TI is in them. And then there's a SWIM feed handler, which is an open source thing that's out there as a sample information service for bridging things. So that's actually really, another one. I'm sure there's lots more, and I would encourage people to provide information to us in the digital transformation work group as to where they are and what they are, so we can add them to the lists, because I'm sure there's tons more. This is just stuff that I'm familiar with. So I'm looking forward to, more input from the outside. Next slide. Again, same idea. The SWIM tool core is in the bottom part there. When I say SWIM EMS, if you go to the next slide, see information consumers. This is something SDK Perf does. And then the next slide, SWIM EMS. So SWIM EMS is one or more servers or services that provide messaging. So messaging, when I say messaging, people may not know what I mean. It's not like email. So AMHS is more of an email type technology, right? In this case, we're providing a multiple message exchange patterns. So you have pub sub, and that's one of the biggest ones. And then request reply, which is more or less what you do with email, right? You say, I'm going to make a request to someone and get a response back, like email out, email back. And then fire and forget, which is more about just broadcast, sort of like you would do with ADSB potentially, if it's not for separation. But the EMS is really how you exchange information. And you have information services, they're putting information on this thing, and then the consumers are pulling the stuff off it. So it's a place where all this information is being exchanged. And an instance of that is essentially a SWIM sandbox. So it's a place that supports the SWIM protocols with these SWIM profiles, like the yellow profile and the APAC that's using as well, and also the FAA. And there's multiples of these products that you can use for this. And then you can start like exchanging information using these patterns, right? Next slide, please. So the feed handler is basically an information, it's a consumer and then a publisher as well, so a provider as well. So it's actually as a subscriber, so to speak, and it's also a publisher in that sense. And it's basically creating a sort of a bridge. And so this is something, again, is another tool to look at. Next slide, please. So guidance, and there's a whole laundry list of things here, right? Which this is more in more depth than what we talked about before. The bottom item, information access, routing, and filtering, is the more advanced topic. But this is all sort of similar to what we talked about, but in more detail. Next slide, please. So the use cases are a great way to drive. So if you're gonna use a sandbox, you're gonna test something, then you have to use something that's as real as possible. And I think FFI's Release 1 is a great way to start. In the past, we didn't have these requirements around cessation of the flight plan 2012, and now we do. So if you're gonna do something, FFI should be a great way to start, because you're gonna have to have it anyway. So that's a very important thing. And then all of these other technologies or standards, we have ATFM, ACDM, you have vehicle and plane tracking on, at the airport, CDM in general, and then there's connected aircraft and so on, right? So you have all these things running on SWIM, but I think FFI should be a great way to start, FFI Release 1. But you may have different use cases that make sense to you, that you may have some system being obsoleted, you may have a very pressing need for some, trying something new in analytics or something, or machine learning or AI or something. It's fine. I mean, whatever is very tangible and something you really need. But if, in lieu of that, I think FFI Release 1 would be a great way to start. Next slide, please. So I really talked about a lot of this before, about the lower cost. Messaging nodes as EMSs can be a fraction of what you would be spending today on these kind of things. There's lots of products to choose from, and luckily there's a lot of implementations out there you can get, I guess really use as experts for you, share the knowledge. So there's a lot of implementation experience out there that you can get. So other ANSPs you can always talk to. There's lots of forums for doing that. CANSO is one of them. So that's one way to gather the knowledge. Next slide, please. So there's also things like cost recovery, monetizing information, which doesn't necessarily mean selling it. It means extracting value from information, which is usually done inside your entity. Let's say your ANSP is an example. So it's just extracting the value out of data that you might not have done before, because now you have more flexibility in doing that. And then there's the information distribution in general, or sharing, and SWIM implementation, and then federated SWIM, which is now the EMSs generally allow you to spread out instances of the EMS so that it can be in multiple locations, even in the cloud. So now you can extend your EMS to go further and further, so that transverse idea goes and extends out to different places, which the FA is a great example. Next slide, please. Same layer cake. These are images that are from the kit itself. Again, just sort of laying out the different pieces. Next slide, please. So there's the PANS-IM. So one of the things you need to have is a QMS, which you probably have anyway, but still stated in there. And then the principles we went over. Sorry, I'm going quickly over this, but I don't have a lot of time. Next slide, please. Information service overviews in the registry, again, really important. There's a template in the PANS-IM at the end that describes the fields and how they're used and so on. And then those are actually implemented in registries, and examples are the FAA, Eurocontrol, and so on. Technical infrastructure, we talked about these different capabilities. Next slide, please. Governance, again, very important. As part of starting, some countries have SWIM steering groups or regions. There's a lot of different ways you can structure it, but you need, champions for SWIM in different areas because it touches almost everything. So it is important that you involve everybody and have governance around it, so everybody knows what's happening with SWIM across all of the stakeholders. Next slide, please. So there's some provisions in PANS-IM about information services, the providers and so on as well. For instance, the registry, if you have let's say you have a web page, which is your registry, it could just be that simple. And then you have an AIP you have to submit to point to that. That's one of the few specific requirements there. Next slide, please. Information exchange is made available through information services. So that's sort of, I want to make sure we got to that sentence because that's important. So the information services aren't just there to be there. That's how information is shared, how it's exchanged is through information services. So don't just think of information services as just a way to break up a large system or application. It's really, the point is that's how information gets exchanged, is through those. Next slide, please. The payload I talked about briefly before. There's different formats, and then there's information metadata, which is the more advanced concept, which you may see some things coming out in the next months about that. Next slide, please. Yeah, this will be good. This is just sort of showing you the publish, subscribe, request, reply in terms of exchanging information through this from TI and EMS with the application of the services. So similar picture which you saw, but more detail. Next slide, please. So this is, I'm going to show you something from the ATM world, which is SWIM, SWIM. But I also, when I say SWIM, in a lot of ways, SWIM is not necessarily unique to ATM. So if you see this picture and you notice on the top, there's two EMSs. It's really considered it one if you wanted to. And so that acts as one EMS, those two instances, right? And so you have on-premise systems you're connected to, and then you have in the cloud, let's say as an example, the other EMS. But they sort of act as one. Just they connect, consumers and applications would connect to whichever one makes sense. But if you see this picture and then you show the next slide, just keep in your memory what's on this slide. It looks almost the same. This is what I would call finance SWIM. This is something that's been in place for many, many years. Same exact thing, but all the participants are different. And you'll notice on the bottom, it says FX trading system. So this is a system that does foreign exchange trading. And you look on the bottom and you'll see things like order management, portfolio managers. This is stuff that they would care about. But what's important to note is there's a lot more things on the bottom. And the reason there is because these industries have been digitized a long time ago. And so what happens is as you digitize, more things become real time. And so things like risk management becomes real time. It's not like a report. It's actually something that's done real time to make sure that nothing happens during the day that creates too much risk. And this is what happens as you get more digitally transformed, is this stuff starts to happen over time. And this is an example of what ends up happening, but the picture is almost exactly the same. Next slide, please. We're almost done. This is important. I mean, this is one of the examples in the SWIM kit is a NOTAM web page. And so it runs in a browser. It does pub sub and request reply. And it's going to the SWIM tool core, which is running in the cloud. And it's actually, the EMS is running up there and also the information service. And so this is sort of just a simple template for how this works in using the SWIM tool. Next slide, please. SWIM TI profiles we talked about. SWIM TI footprint can be in many locations, many platforms. It could be extended out, or it could just be one on-prem, and there's nothing wrong with that. That can happen too. And there's different types: state, regional, and global. Next slide, please. EMS, as I mentioned, it's one or more messaging products. So messaging products could be web servers, message brokers, API management products, all sorts of things. So it's whatever you need to provide the service for messaging, which can be supporting multiple different protocols. But you may have a different product for every protocol, or maybe one product for all the protocols. It's whatever you need to set up to make sure you support what's in a SWIM TI profile in most cases. Next slide, please. Then we have the security again, the cyber stuff I talked about. People need to really look at that. But you're going to have all the standard things you expect. You're going to authenticate to use it, the service. You're going to be authorized. And there's going to be things that are going to try and prevent you from doing things you're not supposed to do. And in SWIM, you have a lot more control and granularity in what you can do around authorization than you had before. Next slide, please. Integration, we talked about after an AMHS. Next slide, please. Example service overview. Again, the PENS IM is a place to look for the examples of descriptions of the fields and what needs to be there. Next slide. These are some best practices. I'm going to skip these because I want you to listen to Lucas more than me on this. So next slide, please. Next slide. Again, Morris, next slide. Next slide. Next slide. I have a lot of best practices, but we don't have time. Next slide. Okay, checklist. So this is one of the things that's in the kit is to try and give you sort of a set of things you can do, using a tool. Could be the swim tool or other tools. Next slide. Okay, sorry, I took a little too long. Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Lucas. He's AFA swim program at office, and I'll hand it off to you.
Great, thanks Wayne. Thanks for that great overview of swim and the swim kit. Lots of good information that all the attendees today will be able to access later. So just a quick note from me up front before I begin. The slides that I'm going to present are really just the FAA's current swim implementation, and just want to stress, along with what Wayne had said, swim can be implemented in more than one way, and how you architect and implement that infrastructure and those capabilities will just depend on your requirements and your goals. Go to the next slide. So our swim journey within the FAA started around 2007. The FAA established a swim program to implement a set of information technology capabilities within our national airspace to provide users with relevant and commonly understandable aviation information. SWIM maximizes the use of current infrastructure, allows the sharing of information between diverse systems, and enables the delivery of the right information to the right place at the right time. You'll hear us say that a lot. You heard Wayne say it earlier. It's a common theme with SWIM implementations. SWIM provides governance to NAS programs to ensure services are SWIM compliant and meets all FAA's service-oriented architecture standards. And by providing this governance and supporting their enterprise infrastructure, SWIM can help reduce the cost and risk for FAA programs to develop and deploy those SWIM services. Next slide. This is very similar to a slide that Wayne presented earlier, so I'll go pretty quick on this one. But really just the point here is that SWIM decouples producers and consumers. So it allows the systems to provide data once through some of SWIM's infrastructure. Consumers can access what they need without building and maintaining hundreds of bespoke point-to-point connections. So on the left, you'll see before SWIM, those point-to-point connections that Wayne described earlier. And on the right, you'll see the after SWIM, much more simplified version of how you can connect and consume information. Next slide. So the SWIM program within the FAA was created to provide that enterprise infrastructure for managing and sharing aviation data in a way that's fast, reliable, and secure. SWIM data is published through all phases of flight within the FAA, from pre-flight planning to takeoff, while en route, and until the flight arrives at the gate of its destination. The SWIM data encompasses flight data, aeronautical, weather, surveillance, and it enables FAA, airlines, strategic partners, and more to efficiently administer air traffic. SWIM can help reduce and avoid some telecommunications costs and helps to protect our systems and sensitive information that flows through them. Next slide. So this is a high-level overview of what our SWIM implementation looks like. There are a lot of acronyms on this page, and each represents a system with specific functions within the NAS, the National Airspace, and they're organized by data type. You'll notice those around the top and the left in green. Each of the systems are categorized under each of the data types. So you'll see the various under flight and flow, aeronautical, surveillance, and weather. The SWIM messaging infrastructure is in the middle. You'll see the big SWIM bubble there with NIMS, which is our NAS Enterprise Messaging Service. Within that service, there are multiple core services represented, such as enterprise monitoring or security capabilities. And then from there, you'll see lines that go out to users. So we have two ways currently for users to consume data from SWIM. We have our on-prem services that connect through our enterprise security gateway. And then we have our cloud service that connects directly into the public cloud. And those users can connect and consume basically all of the data that they consume on-prem minus the sensitive security information. Next slide. So a little bit about our evolution. So SWIM for us has been done in incremental builds. It's evolved over time. We've come a long way since the initial deployment, from the introduction of service-oriented architecture and the focus on the cultural shift that was needed for implementing the service-oriented architecture. This was done by establishing the governance or the rules for the stakeholders involved, Through the creation and enforcement of policies, procedures, and the processes of the SWIM program, we were able to drive the overall behavior model of the participants, and we're able to ensure that the business objectives of the SWIM program were met. From that early initial segment 1, we moved into the deployment of our enterprise messaging infrastructure within our segment 2 timeframe at the top. This allowed those core messaging services and additional enterprise capabilities and mission services like our identity access management functions and enterprise service monitoring. We have had to conduct a few tech refreshes throughout our time here of the hardware as it ages out, comes into life. We've worked on increasing our capacity due to user growth, and now we're looking to provide infrastructure improvements as we move forward into our later segments. Along with those improvements, we're looking to bring more automation to our process flows and some added security capabilities. Next slide. Important slide here that I'll spend a little bit more time on are some of the lessons learned. So these are just a few of the ones that we really thought were important to share, and just to keep in mind of some of these as go through some of the later slides as well. So operational feedback. I think it's important to understand and accept that operational environments often reveal real constraints, edge cases, and performance considerations that can't fully be predicted during design and development. So having a feedback loop from the operational users allows us to prioritize fixes and enhancements to make the biggest impact on the mission. For protocols and API types, one size doesn't necessarily fit all, and I think that's more true now than ever. So limiting API types can restrict data accessibility for modern consumers, and not only does this enable a broader stakeholder engagement, but will help to future-proof the implementations against technical obsolescence. It is also encouraged to use flexible standards-based interfaces, and that can help reduce onboarding friction. Like the way that we implemented, incremental builds can be something that work well. It worked well for us in our implementation. As you saw in the previous slide, we've incrementally developed and delivered, and this helped to de-risk investments in deployments while building confidence with our stakeholders. Monitoring. So observability equals reliability. Like security, monitoring can become difficult if it's not built in from the beginning. Monitoring should not be an afterthought, as it is a core feature that supports service continuity, service level agreements, and stakeholder confidence. And then technology. So you want to try to use technology to your advantage. Learn to balance the stability of the system with the adoption of modern technologies, and that can be a challenge. Technology is an enabler, but only when you align it with user needs, the operational context, and your lifecycle planning. Next slide. So our current infrastructure rides on top of our larger FAA telecommunications infrastructure. I think it was one of the first slides that Wayne presented and showed the layers from the IP network and on down to the services and the standards. So same thing here within the FAA. We ride on top of that telecommunications infrastructure. We implement the standards and have business services that produce that data. Currently, our messaging footprint is spread out across 4 geographic locations and provides those producers and those systems that produce data on the SWIM the ability to architect their deployments in a diverse way. When we originally sized and scaled our system, we had infrastructure deployed at about 20 locations. So at the time, we were assuming that there would be more web services and more JMS producers at more than just a few sites across the country. There were some spread out across, but after the services were implemented, most were within a core set of deployments, and most were JMS pub sub. So as we continue to evolve and taking the feedback from operations and from our users, allowed us over time to consolidate our internal messaging nodes without impacting any performance to our users. Technology was also another factor that allowed us to lessen our footprint. So as we upgraded our messaging infrastructure, performance levels of our messaging nodes increased, which allowed further consolidation to the footprint that we have today. Our current SWIM cloud distribution service that I'll talk a little bit more about in the next few slides is hosted on the publicly accessible cloud and help to reduce the number of VPNs coming into the FAA through our security gateway. SCDS is that cloud platform, and it allows the data to leave the FAA domain once and then get fanned out to hundreds of consumers. So that efficiency of using that newer technology. Next slide. Some of our core SWIM messaging capabilities. So applications, most of our messaging applications use publish subscribe message exchange patterns using JMS. We do have a few using AMQP and a few using request reply services using web services. In addition to those general messaging capabilities, we have other core services embedded within our enterprise messaging service, such as different routing and filtering mechanisms, guaranteed delivery options, mediation, transformation, load balancing, and all these core services are ordered and provisioned as needed by our users. So we, within the SWIM program office, we provide that enterprise messaging service, the capabilities that allow these producers and consumers to get the information that they need. And within the FAA, our systems will request and will provision those services that meet the needs of their program. All traffic outside of our cloud capability must go through our enterprise security gateway when connecting and consuming data. So that's when they directly connect in through a VPN, not through our SCDS cloud capability. We also have some capabilities for test and R&D, have different environments for those activities for users to develop and test against prior to moving into our operational environments. Next slide. So the SWIM Cloud Distribution Service and the Swift Portal, which is a set of products and capabilities around the messaging service that's in the cloud, was developed back in 2019. So the sustained success of SWIM led to the continued growth of the community, and we got more and more consumers requesting data. And this was the result of some of that success, is the development of this cloud service to allow more accessible information to the general public. This cloud-based infrastructure provides near real-time data to the public. This service moved the majority of our external users off of the on-prem infrastructure and onto the cloud. This reduced the load on our security gateway, provided benefits to those users as well. So within the cloud platform, they will have automated provisioning for subscriptions to get the data that they need. And it's much more of a self-service function for them on the cloud, opposed to our current on-prem infrastructure. That Swift Portal aspect brings additional benefits to users. So outside of the messaging capability, we provide different functions for the users, such as reporting, a community forum for allowing users to interact with one another, collaborate, ask questions. We have a service status function that will show the status of each of our data feeds. We have a discovery and support page, and that support page includes a ticketing system, FAQs, and user guides. Next slide. So for the SWIM Jumpstart Kit, this is something that's similar to some of the things that Wayne talked about, and it's available through the SWIM Kit, but this is a separate product that we offer through our services, and it's a useful tool that's available to all of our users of our SWIM services. It's a consumer application. It's designed to provide an easily customizable process for obtaining and processing data from the SWIM platform. This is a simple JMS consumer, and it allows for the testing of the connection to our cloud platform. It's not intended to be used for a real-world application, but just the learning, the troubleshooting, and understanding how to connect to our SWIM platform. So that the job of this Jumpstart Kit is to receive data from the messaging service and process it however that user desires. Some typical tasks might include just writing data to disk or printing it to screen. Transition to the next image. In this Jumpstart Kit, as I mentioned, we do have some tutorials within the Swift Portal support page. There will be a link at the end of my brief that shows exactly where this can be found. It's a series of, I believe, 3 or 4 videos and how to use this Jumpstart Kit. So it's just an easily downloadable couple videos to get you started and answer any questions you may have with that process. And next slide. Now we're going to jump into a little bit about our SWIM modernization on the next slide, and some of the things we're exploring for the future and as we continue to modernize our SWIM infrastructure and SWIM capabilities. So within our modernization plans we're working on now includes the evolution to a more modern microservice architecture, and it will provide users with a highly available services using modern technologies. We're looking at expanding our cloud architecture to enable a bidirectional exchange for our trusted users that will take away or that will add to the capabilities of on-prem, and again be able to move some of those on-prem users to the cloud. This will further reduce some of those requirements on the VPN connections and be more efficient for the FAA and for our users. And while we expand those cloud capabilities, we still plan to maintain a flexible hybrid deployment and flexibility with messaging protocols. Another area that we're looking to improve, especially for those on-prem users, is the onboarding processes. Another key area. So as we expand those cloud services and introduce new enterprise API management and enterprise API gateways, there'll be opportunities there to streamline some of our workflows, automate some of our processes, and leverage some of the low-code, no-code solutions to improve that time to market. So we're looking to utilize commercial off-the-shelf tools wherever possible and integrate with our current FAA enterprise monitoring tools for better monitoring, troubleshooting, and maintenance within our processes. Next slide. Thank you. So the introduction of API management. So the SWIM Program Office is also introducing a centralized platform to develop, discover, and manage governed APIs. Again, looking to use a COTS product here that will complement the current messaging infrastructure for the exchange of information within the NAS. Many of our current and future FAA systems will plan to incorporate modern APIs and advanced messaging with technologies like gRPC, GraphQL for the data exchange and data communication management. So a common and reusable API management platform promotes the accelerated software development, deployment, accessibility, and potential cost savings as new common services are introduced on the SWIM. So this capability will provide an end-to-end solution for development, testing, publishing, discovery, monitoring, and the management of these APIs. We'll be introducing this API management capability that offers a complete, cost-effective, and modern platform for a hybrid API and event-driven architecture. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the registry. So as Wayne mentioned earlier, the registry can be simple, it can be a little bit more complex. We started our registry shortly after we started our SWIM journey, and it was identified early that we needed a tool to make the services on SWIM discovery, searchable, and retrievable. And this was accomplished through the formal cataloging of the service metadata and establishing and operating the NAS service registry repository, or we call it the NSRR. This registry serves as that central point of information about all of our SWIM services that are available in operations and that are under development. So we'll have that full life cycle of a service depicted there in our registry. The registry has grown from the initial developments. Initial use was around 600 users in the first year or so, and now we're nearly up to 3,000 users that log in and use and review the information about our data services. This consistent growth over time reflects its increasing value as the authoritative source for SWIM discovery information, documentation, and that lifecycle governance. And as we move forward with our SWIM modernization efforts, we are looking at the NSR and that current registry system and how we will integrate that with our future API management products and capabilities to determine what that future need is for our registry, how to best improve it, and make it even better for the users and stakeholders of our SWIM services. Looking to harmonize those two capabilities into a single information service registry. Some of the So for harmonization efforts, in forums like this and others, we are looking across our swim implementation planning and our FFICE planning. Harmonization is critically important for global adoption. Wayne touched on a lot of the different efforts right now going on, from the Flight Plan 2012 secession to the CP1 mandate. So our teams participate in many different forums in various regions. A few of the efforts that I wanted to highlight on this brief are part of our efforts with Europe and within our deployment committee. So we're looking at the different swim connection methods between the FAA and Europe, how those work together, how they can connect, how they are similar, how they differ. We're looking at FFICE services, what's planned there, what's being deployed, any differences. We're doing a deep dive into the EFPL, or that enhanced flight plan that will come with FFICE, to understand what the regional implementations look like, what might differ, what might be the same, to make sure we understand any issues that might arise due to those differences. Looking at timelines for implementation so that we have a good view across the globe on the progress and where we're going and how we're getting to that end state of a harmonized deployment. And as we work through these areas, we also plan to share these lessons learned as they come up in forums like this, with any recommendations we have, and sharing with other ANSPs and airspace users as they're developed. I think that takes me to the closing. So got us, I think, back on time to take a lot of questions. And next slide is just takeaways. So really just to reiterate some of the key points and lessons learned here as we go through this brief. SWIM, looking at it as a methodology, not a technology. Our technology will always change. That's a constant. And the constant thing that is always needed is the information. We need to align the scale of technology with the operational need, and utilize resources like the SWIM kit as it continues to evolve and support the harmonization and adoption of SWIM services globally. Making sure that we have pathways for continuous feedback loops between SWIM operations and planning to ensure that those lessons learned, issues, recommendations make it into our future timelines. Designing with the scale and potential for scale in mind, understanding that as the data increases, the need and the opportunity for that data will also increase. And then implementing consistent, repeatable processes and guidelines. I think is a key thing that all of our stakeholders want, is for our processes to be repeatable and consistent, and to make sure that those guidelines for our SWIM implementation are shared and easily accessible. The next slide, just as a resource for links, you'll find the link to our SWIFT portal. It is available for folks to register, username, password, all the information. You can access the SWIM Jumpstart Kit and all the other information that I mentioned. A link to our SWIFT forum page. Our next meeting is still TBD, meeting number 22, but there's a lot of great information there from previous meetings, slide decks from those meetings that describe a lot of our services and the services that are coming in the future. A few other sites are FAA SWIM GitHub with some resources, and I think the Jumpstart Kit today is there as well. There's another example, JMS clients, and some other utilities, and then just some links to our fixsum.aero and some of the ICAO pages. I believe with that, just my contact information. If anyone has questions after this session, happy to respond and work with you, and thank you for your time.
Well, hello again, everyone. Before proceeding to the question and answer session, I just want to thank both Wayne and Lucas for their excellent presentations. I understand and I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time, but thank you all for investing the time and just listening. There were quite a few questions, and Wayne did help me answer some of them when Lucas was presenting. However, I will go to them for some of the questions, and please chime in, both Lucas and Wayne. where you see fit. So the first question was, who is the main stakeholder of SWIM, the ANSP, or the CAA? So the ANSP has specific provisions to conform to and is the primary stakeholder, but the CAA is closely related and involved. They ensure that the ANSP implements SWIM according to provisions. Any additional thoughts there, Lucas?
No, I think that covered it pretty well. I think, yeah, the ANSP is obviously a major stakeholder there. All the systems within that ANSP, and then it's all of your stakeholders, you know, your users, your external and internal.
Yep. Could you describe a case of an airspace user benefiting from implementing SWIM? Having a case to reference could help with getting airspace users on board. Airspace users benefit from increased information that FIXM format supports now and easily adapts to later. Could you advise the first step to start the implementation of SWIM within an ANSP? The first step for an ANSP is to read the ICAO documents, SWIM kit, and start using or running a SWIM sandbox as soon as possible. I believe the link to the CANSO publication on the SWIM implementation guide was sent in the chat. So the link will direct you to the publication. Any additional information there, Lucas or Wayne?
The only thing I would say is just, you know, doing some internal homework as well, you know, evaluating your current capabilities, your infrastructure, your organizational maturity, to really determine what you need within SWIM, doing that gap analysis, understanding, you know, based on what you've learned from other ANSPs implementations, what would best fit your use cases and your needs.
Yeah, I think as Lucas said, I think that last part, learning from other ANSPs is extremely valuable, and there's a lot of resources in that sense. So I think before you go and try and do it all yourself, there's lots of good examples and good help from ANSPs that you can get. Some of this is within, I mean, you can reach out directly to a lot of ANSPs, but there's also the forums in ICAO and CANSO, for instance, to provide that.
Thank you. All right. How much programming knowledge do you need to have for using the SWIM tool, the SWIM kit? How much knowledge of sandboxes do you need? SWIM kit first impression is it Java oriented, or is there also a C oriented system kit demos? I know that was a loaded multiple questions within one. I do know that the SWIM kit does not need programming knowledge, but definitely digital transformation skilled. I will hand that question over to Wayne, and then Lucas, if you have any additional inputs, please do share.
Yeah, the SWIM tool is written in Java, but the SWIM tool is really just the sort of exterior facade to an EMS, right? And the EMS, most EMSs you can use almost any language with. And part of the reason for using open wireline protocols like AMQP 1.0 and HTTP is that you can use almost any language to use those. So AMQP 1.0, the open source Cupid API, for instance, supports many languages. There's lots of ways you can access the EMS to provide information exchange. The SWIM tool is more of examples code, Java code that's around the EMS, so that you can see how you might interact with it. But you can use multiple different tools and languages. So the SDK perf tool that I mentioned before, there's different languages. So there's a C version, there's an AMQP version, there's a REST version, there's all sorts. So, you know, if you think about the SWIM tool is really just sort of one example of the layer around the EMS, but you can access the EMS directly, and you can use pretty much any language usually. I mean, they've been around for quite a while, support a lot of things, C, C++, Python, Go, lots of things.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same for this. I was going to say it's pretty much the same for the Swim Jumpstart Kit. It is just a sample client. It's, you know, I don't think you have to have any really coding knowledge to run it from our cloud platform. It's pretty straightforward, especially with the videos. But then when you go to customize that for whatever needs that you might have, obviously some coding experience there will be useful to make sure you understand where you want to take that application, what you need to do with the data.
Thank you. How can PANS IAM be applied in a state which has not yet implemented SWIM? I believe taking into account the November 28th date.
Yeah, that was, I mean, there are some provisions that kick in when you create, if you have a SWIM implementation plan, then all of a sudden now you need a SWIM implementation framework. So there are some triggers. So even before you actually implement it, some of this is pretty new, so it's not like, oh, all these, you know, a lot of the ANSPs have implemented, so it may not even have some of those things yet because this was done so long ago. But that is technically in the provisions. But the provisions are very high level. There's not a lot in there that is forcing your hand. But for instance, the SWIM registry is the same way. You can activate some more restrictive, and they're not really hard, but restrictive provisions. So if you do provide a more sophisticated SWIM registry, then you have to support provisions that say you have to have a way of searching them and so on, which if you do a very simplified version of a SWIM registry, you don't have to do. So, you know, so there's a couple triggers for things like that, but there's not a lot in the SWIM provisions that are forcing you, except things like the QMS and, you know, some, you know, motherhood and apple pie stuff that you probably would be doing anyway. But this PANS IAM is not that long, so I think that's a great place to just read through and make sure you understand it, so that you don't, you know, have something that you're starting to do and you didn't realize there's a provision that's related. But it's really pretty high level.
Lucas, can you offer a brief summary of the roles and background of SWIM staff?
Sure. I think, you know, a lot of it's going to follow any project management organization. So you're going to need your I would suggest you would need your program manager, you know, a set of engineers, potentially some data analysts. Depending on what you are going to be building, you'll need some sort of development team, and depending on, I think, you know, your choice of implementation. If you're going the MS route, obviously you'll need some networking folks, solutions architects, just to name a few. You know, really just managing that project, trying to stay on track, you know, within budget. We obviously have our finance folks to keep us in line there, and then we, depending on, you know, your amount of outreach, you might need some sort of outreach specialists, stakeholder engagement folks to help with that work. And then depending on if you're developing in-house or going external to a company to get any services, you might need some sort of contracting officer to help you out to make sure you're protected within your purchasing. I think that's a very quick, high-level overview there.
Absolutely. And Wayne, I know you had an additional point to add there.
Well, I think the like in the case like Lucas mentioned, that like if you're in a state where you only outsource, you basically, you know, buy everything, and there's a lot of states like that. We've noticed it in some of the smaller states. They've actually gotten some more technical staff that they didn't even used to have, mostly to just make sure they understand what they're purchasing, which is always a good thing. And I think some of the ANSPs who've started doing that have realized that they can do. And I think it's because once they get the experience with SWIM, they start to realize that there's things they can do before that are not, doesn't require that much staff to do. If they want to just do sort of some smaller pieces. But if you purchase it, then you let's say you have this SWIM implementation sitting there, but then how do you leverage it? You know, so I mean, it's important to understand what you have there, because it's going to cross your systems. So it's not just, oh, I solved this problem, I bought this thing and it's done. It's like, well, like we talked about, this stuff, it keeps going. And as it grows and there's more and more sharing, you need to know what you have, and you need to be aware of how you can potentially purchase other things that you may need to work with it. That's why sandboxes are useful, because they can be used as validation tools too. You can say, okay, well, I'm going to put out a tender for something, but then if, you know, you say, well, in a requirement, you have to work with my sandbox before, that's a requirement. Like if you can't work with that EMS or that swim TI, then, then you don't pass, right? As opposed to just writing everything down in text and then they all put check boxes, right? So it kind of keeps it more honest. We got to keep remembering that swim is a platform, so it's basically crosses all of these other systems. So you have lots of opportunities that you didn't have before, so you need to be aware of them, and you do need a little expertise to understand that.
Absolutely. How can we access the swim kit? As mentioned, the link is in the chat to the CANSO implementation guide. And we will start hosting swim workshops. Actually, the first one will be in Africa the first week in December, and that's where the tools will be presented for use. Does swim require use of internet for consumers? Swim does not require the public internet for users, just an IP network. So this can be a private IP network in itself. Another question came in on, can you clarify if the EU CP1 implementation is only for the flight planning unit of airlines only? Since it only involves filing electronic flight plans, EU CP1 covers many more areas and use cases than just flight planning. Any elaboration there, either Lucas or Wayne?
Yeah, it covers a lot. I mean, it gets into airports and yeah, it's a lot of stuff. It's not just ACDM and so on. There's a lot of pieces to it. The FFI side is just, of course, more highlighted because of these requirements around Flight Plan 2012 cessation. So there's more pressing need for that and more, broader. But there's a lot of coordination that's done. And of course, it's much better to have a Eurocontrol person answering this question than me. But there's a lot more in there for sure.
Absolutely. What does NAS mean in swim context? It is a FAA specific term, National Airspace System. And Lucas, I'll go to you for this one. What is the difference between FFI services and electronic flight plan fields?
Sure. Yeah. So within the FFICE documentation, within the services, it's a set of the mandatory services and an optional services. So it's a limited set there, mandatory, the filing service and the flight data request. They may be moving notification service in the future. You'll have optional trial services, data publication, and the planning service. And then when you get to the EFPL, that's the flight plan itself. So on top of the ICAO or ICAO 2012 flight plan, there's going to be 30 additional fields. So those are all the individual fields from the route, top of climb, top of descent, aircraft information, so all the different details that make up that flight plan.
Thank you, Lucas. And I'll stay with you for a minute. In your FAA implementation process, has there been any data flows that have not been deemed applicable? Example was used as a safety critical.
Yeah, so our current swim implementation is for essential services. I believe we're at 3 nines of availability right now and working on increasing that to 4 nines, which for us is efficiency critical. Right now, we're not deemed for safety critical data communications. As we mature and as requirements come in, we could certainly try to meet those. But right now, the requirement for our swim implementation does not include safety critical data flows.
Thank you. And Wayne, what AI applications are currently being integrating into ATM systems in conjunction with SWIM, and what benefits are being observed?
Okay. Some of the AI types of systems are not necessarily using SWIM at this point, kind of like ACDM and ATFM are just beginning to get into this, right? So, but they can very much benefit from it. As an example, in one airport in particular, well, there's a couple airports that are using AI for looking at the gate specifically with cameras, because computer vision's gotten so sophisticated now and easy to use. So that they can actually see when the plane really leaves the gate. things like that. So there's things like that. But then there's also automation, not just AI. And I think automation will increasingly, as an example, in airports will increasingly be used. There's one airport that I think in 3 years are saying there will be no people on the apron, and that's about automation and using things like swim. And again, a lot of these use cases, they're using swim. They're actually using the same products. They're using the same kind of thing, right? They're just using it at an airport, and they may not even call it swim or think it's swim, but they may very well be using AMQP 1.0 and HTTP and the same things that are in a swim profile that's used in Europe or in the FAA or wherever. So it's sort of a standard thing, to have information exchange this way now. So as far as where it's used in AI and whatever, there's also in one case the data gets pushed around from video cameras even over messaging. So there's things like that are going on as well. So which you wouldn't normally think, like hundreds of 4K video cameras, right? Messaging, but that's happening. So you can pipe a lot of this information into, in some states where there's a lot of university research, they have a way of getting the information over SWIM. Same thing with MET. A lot of MET information is starting to flow over SWIM. There's that side of things too. But then as far as AI goes, I don't know, Lucas, if you can think of any other ones. I mean, I know about Apron AI. I don't think that's using particularly SWIM, for instance. It's using Toronto Airport. But I don't know, Lucas, if you have any examples.
Not really for AI at the moment for us. No, we're more in the exploratory phase with AI and more on the the administrative side with some of those capabilities. We're not currently introducing those into our SWIM infrastructure. That's something we'll continue to look at in the future and see how that could best be utilized. But at the moment, we don't have any active use cases with AI on SWIM.
I think there is one more thing, which is there are some agent meshes being developed that use essentially the EMSs that are being used for SWIM too. So again, it's just reusing the same infrastructure. And I think it's important. The EMSs are really are more of a digital transformation set of products than they are like SWIM in particular. It just so happens they support the SWIM protocols. So, but they can be used for other things too.
Thank you both. I'll jump to a cybersecurity question. I know that we can't totally protect from cyber attacks, but does SWIM face any cybersecurity challenges in general?
I'd like to hear from Lucas on this, but I have some things to say too.
Because he's an ASP. So.
But yeah, I think all of our systems will face cybersecurity challenges and do face cybersecurity challenges. And I think, from a non-cybersecurity expert, I would just say, following best practices and standards. I know one thing that we're looking into is zero trust policies, understanding how we can implement that zero trust. We have a good identity access management program within the FAA to issue certificates to systems to ensure that, the system that we think we're talking to is that system, and we can validate and verify that. So, some of those best practices and standards and capabilities with certificate management and ensuring that is up and available and running to ensure that you are talking to you're supposed to be talking to is an important thing, and just continuing to evolve your infrastructure to align with a more zero trust type of model.
Yeah, I think also I thought the ANSG perspective was very valuable here because he has to live with it, right? So, but the different kinds of security in terms of best practices wise, for instance, you segment your network, right? That's like a lower level thing. But then what SWIM does allow you to do is it allows you to do what's considered application level segmentation. So it's called micro-segmentation, which is you can actually control who's allowed to send and receive what information at a granular level. So this is something that gets in some of the advanced metadata product, message metadata kind of area, but you can have some very strong controls there. Whereas let's say, one type of stakeholder can't send a certain kind of request because they're not the right role. that kind of thing, which is role-based security is a very standard thing too, right? But you can implement that at even lower levels in SWIM if you know, using, again, the products that are being used for lots of things.
Great. I will go to probably one last question. Any examples of what should not be a part of a SWIM platform implementation? Are there any data elements that shouldn't be part of SWIM? Wayne, do you want to start that one?
Well, yeah, this is sort of this could be like a hole that we could get into, but I would say probably no. I mean, I know in the past there's been cases where there's been data packages that people have been shipping around, like information packages, like payloads, right? And there might have been different pieces of that information that are specific, like to a certain consumer, and they're sensitive, right? And maybe Lucas can talk a little bit about the sensitive data kind of thing, because I know there's some relationship to, you know, what's in the cloud and what's not. But you know, you have the ability to send not necessarily an entire document, but a piece of the document too, right? And so you can break messages down into pieces, right, and have references to each other, for instance, which I think Met does a lot, right? I think a lot of their WIS2 system is they communicate notifications, but then you go over the web to like a web protocol to get the data, that kind of thing. So you can, there's some more innovative ways of getting information and making sure that pieces of it are not exposed. So like FFICE is a good example, and I'm sure Lucas can talk to this, which is there's the capabilities of the aircraft inside those messages, right? And so it's very important that's not shared with everybody. So that's one example. But I don't know, Lucas, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I think one thing I can say is, within our program office, when we have a new system or data product coming through, it goes through architecture review boards. We have a SOA assessment that we call it, and we really look at that data, what it is, who's going to consume it, to identify, is this more suited for a regular point-to-point connection? If there's only one person and one use case for it, it might not need or benefit from going through SWIM. Versus if you're going to be sending out surveillance information for airports where the planes are on the ground, obviously that's a good use case for SWIM. A lot of people want that data. And then to Wayne's point, just making sure that the data you do send out is filtered correctly, tagged correctly if it is sensitive, so it's not getting shared with the wrong people. That is a key point that we continue to audit and take a look at to make sure that the right data is getting to the right people. So back to that tagline.
Absolutely. And last, and I promised last one. What SWIM requirements should be included in a ATM system specification if an ANSP is actually looking to either upgrade their system? I'll leave it at that.
Don't know where to start with that one.
I know.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because I've been seeing something about this recently myself, but I think it's important that you, depending on your state and what region you're in, or whatever, there's certain SWIM profiles, right, technical infrastructure profiles that you should make sure that it conforms to. And when it comes to things like supporting things like FFICE and so on, right, these are, this is coming. It's not like, it's not there now, but you need to have those services in place, right? So having the ability to handle the formats and the conversions to old to new and things like that, and also the integration with AFTA and AMHS and so on, depending on how you do it. Some states do like SWIM and AMHS in parallel. Some of them kind of mix them. It depends on how it's done. But that's important too. And actually the transition, the transformations from AMHS to SWIM is a very interesting area, which is being talked about in the IMP right now too. Actually next week. How do you reconcile? Because there's certain constraints on every technology, so if you're going from one to another, how do you map them? Can you map them? So that integration part and migration over time, how do you migrate? Because there's so many systems that will eventually be using SWIM that you can't expect to just do them all at once, and that's why it's good to just pick certain things and start with them. But yeah, any of the swim technical infrastructure profile that is applicable to you, and let's say you're in APAC, there's APAC 1, Europe, there's Europe. Make sure you have any system, ATM system, to conform to those, and be flexible. And I would say one thing that swim does do is it allows you to procure things in smaller pieces. And so you don't necessarily have to procure an entire system as a whole. And an ATM system, I know typically is a whole, but you could have different information services that are provided by other entities outside of the main ATM system. So, it's not like one big monolithic system anymore. The idea is that you don't have one big monolithic system. And if you do, make sure they break it into information services or pieces, so that now you may decide you want to implement some of those over time, or maybe you want to offer those to a different ANSP. So yeah, things like that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you all for your questions. I know we didn't get to all of them. However, we will consolidate the ones we didn't get to and ensure the answers are distributed to the registered attendees. Thank you again to both Lucas and Wayne for your insights and your expertise in presenting today. And thank you to all who joined and engaged with us throughout this session. Special thanks to the CANSO events team that was on with us today, both Ruth and Sam, for hosting. So we set out today with a simple but important goal to accelerate swim readiness by demystifying what it is, why it matters, and how to take practical steps forward. We explored the background and drivers behind swim, learned about the swim kit and how it can serve as both a guide and a sandbox for implementation, and heard directly from the FAA. Thank you to Lucas on their lessons learned, showing us that while the journey isn't always easy, the benefits and safety, efficiency, and collaborations are very real. As a reminder, the swim toolkit is available on the CANSO website. It's also linked into the chat, and we encourage you to explore it further and use it as a reference and bring it into your own organizations to support your digital transformation efforts. I'd like to highlight that this is just the beginning. Swim is an evolving capability, as mentioned by both Wayne and Lucas, that will continue to shape how we share and manage information across aviation globally. And by working together, ANSPs, industry, and partners, we can make sure the foundation we're laying today will support the air traffic system for tomorrow. So on behalf of CANSO, I just want to say thank you again for being part of this important conversation. We look forward to continuing the dialogue through future CANSO Academy webinars and workshops through our working groups. Have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.